I never imagined my 29th birthday would end with me discovering I was adopted, my sister in tears, and my entire family imploding. But when my father raised his glass and announced that my sister Kimberly was the only one worth celebrating, something inside me finally broke. That moment exposed decades of lies that would forever change the meaning of family for all of us. I still remember the look on everyone's faces as I walked out of that restaurant. If you've ever wondered what it feels like when a family secret destroys everything you thought you knew about yourself, let me tell you my story. Before I continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Family drama seems to hit differently depending on where you're from. Hit like if you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, and subscribe to catch more stories about family secrets and how they can completely transform relationships when they finally come to light. To understand why my father's words cut so deeply, you need to know about our family dynamic. I'm Karen Mitchell, born and raised in Seattle. From as early as I can remember, there were subtle signs that my sister, Kimberly, 2 years younger than me, was the favorite child. Our childhood photos tell the story. Kimberly always centered, always wearing the brightest clothes, always the focus of our parents' attention, while I stood awkwardly to the side. Our parents, Robert and Diane Mitchell, had specific expectations for their daughters. My father built his construction company from nothing into a regional powerhouse. My mother was a former beauty pageant contestant who never quite got over not making it to Miss America. Perhaps that's why Kimberly's performing arts talents always seemed to matter more than my academic achievements. When I brought home straight A's, my report card would be glanced at and placed on the refrigerator with a generic good job. But when Kimberly landed even a minor role in a school play, there would be flowers, celebration dinners, and endless phone calls to relatives. I remember sitting through countless dance recitals, school plays, and singing competitions, listening to my parents gush about Kimberly's incredible talent and star quality. I learned early on that the best way to get any attention in our house was to be exceptional. So I threw myself into academics, staying up late studying, joining every academic club, and eventually graduating as valedictorian of my high school. My speech that day was attended by my grandmother and one aunt. My parents and Kimberly were at a callback for a commercial Kimberly didn't even end up getting. College was another stark example of the disparity. Despite earning a partial scholarship to MIT for computer science, my parents informed me they could only contribute minimally to my education because times were tight with the business. I took out substantial student loans, worked 2 part-time jobs, and lived in the cheapest housing available. Meanwhile, when Kimberly decided she wanted to attend an expensive performing arts school in Los Angeles, suddenly money was no object. They paid her full tuition, bought her a car, and covered the rent for a nice apartment. When I asked about the financial situation improving, my mother simply said, "Kimberly's pursuing a much riskier career path. She needs more support." After graduation, I started at a small tech firm, taking an entry-level position, and working my way up through pure determination. Over 7 years, I moved from company to company, building my reputation, expanding my skills, and finally landing a position at one of Seattle's premier software companies. Just last month, I was promoted to senior software engineer with a substantial salary increase and team leadership responsibilities. My personal life hadn't been quite as successful. My most recent relationship with Brett had ended 6 months ago after 3 years together. He claimed I was too focused on work and not emotional enough for a long-term commitment. What he really meant was that I wasn't willing to scale back my career ambitions to prioritize his. Meanwhile, Kimberly's post-college life had been a series of almost breakout roles and failed relationships. She'd moved back to Seattle after 4 years of minimal success in Los Angeles. Despite being 27, she still lived primarily off our parents' support, taking occasional small roles in local productions and working part-time as a barista. Yet somehow, this lifestyle was met with endless patience and encouragement from our parents, who constantly reassured her that her big break was just around the corner. Despite all this, I maintained a relationship with my family. Weekly dinners, holiday gatherings, occasional weekend brunches. I told myself that the favoritism I perceived was just in my head, that families are complicated, and that deep down, my parents loved us equally. I believed that if I just achieved enough, if I just proved my worth convincingly enough, they would finally see me. That's why I was actually excited when my mother suggested a family dinner at Canlis, one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants, to celebrate my birthday. I thought perhaps this was a turning point, a recognition of my accomplishments. I even bought new clothes for the occasion and spent extra time on my hair and makeup. For once, I wanted to be the center of attention in my family. I had no idea that this dinner would be the catalyst for unraveling everything I thought I knew about myself and my family. Canlis sits perched on a hillside overlooking Lake Union, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of the Seattle skyline. Under normal circumstances, it would have been the perfect setting for a celebration. I arrived 15 minutes early, giving my name to the maitre d', who led me to a corner table with one of the best views in the house. My parents arrived next, my father in his standard business attire, and my mother wearing an elegant black dress with the pearl necklace my father had given her on their 30th anniversary. They greeted me with perfunctory hugs, my mother commenting that my new navy blue dress was slimming before asking if I'd heard from Kimberly. She texted that she's running a bit late, I replied, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. Kimberly was chronically late to everything, a trait my parents always forgave as artistic temperament. We ordered drinks while waiting for my sister. I sipped a glass of Cabernet while my father talked about his latest development project. My mother mostly checked her phone, occasionally adding to the conversation. No mention was made of my birthday or my recent promotion. I reminded myself to be patient. Perhaps they were waiting until everyone arrived before the celebrating began. Almost 40 minutes late, Kimberly finally arrived. But she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by a stylish woman in her 50s, whom she introduced as Martina Diaz, a casting director from Los Angeles, and a younger man named Trevor, her new agent. My heart sank. Somehow, my birthday dinner had already become about Kimberly. I hope it's okay I brought guests, Kimberly said, though it clearly wasn't a question. She was already sitting down, directing Martina to the seat next to our father. They're only in town for tonight, and when I mentioned we were having dinner at Canlis, they just had to join. My parents, predictably, were thrilled by the additions. My father immediately engaged Martina in conversation, asking about her career and projects, while my mother fawned over Trevor, telling him how lucky he was to represent someone as talented as Kimberly. The waiter came to take our order, and my father selected several expensive bottles of wine to celebrate, though what we were celebrating remained unspecified. I ordered the salmon, though I was quickly losing my appetite. As the appetizers arrived, Kimberly cleared her throat dramatically. "I actually have some news," she announced, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Martina has cast me in her new independent film. It's a supporting role, but it has real potential for exposure. We start shooting next month in Vancouver." The table erupted in congratulations. My father stood up to toast Kimberly, praising her persistence and talent. My mother actually teared up, saying she'd always known Kimberly would make it. Martina added that Kimberly had that special quality she'd been looking for. Even the waiter, returning with our entrees, was pulled into the celebration, with my father insisting he bring champagne for the whole table. I sat there, forcing a smile, as my birthday dinner transformed entirely into a celebration of Kimberly's minor role. I should have been used to it by now, but something about this particular night made it harder to swallow. Perhaps because I genuinely believed that my recent promotion might finally earn me equal standing in my family's eyes. As the excitement died down and we began eating our main courses, I decided to share my news anyway. "I actually have some news too," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic rather than competitive. "I got promoted to senior software engineer last week. It comes with a substantial raise, and I'll be leading a team developing a new security protocol." The response was lukewarm at best. My mother nodded distractedly. "That's nice, dear." My father gave a brief, "Good for you," before turning back to Martina. Kimberly, to her credit, did ask what the promotion meant, but her attention quickly shifted when Trevor mentioned potential auditions in New York. As dessert arrived, a small chocolate cake with a single candle that the restaurant provided, after seeing my birthday noted on the reservation, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Does anyone actually remember why we're supposed to be here tonight?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My mother looked embarrassed, while my father seemed annoyed at the interruption. "Of course we know it's your birthday," my mother said, though her tone lacked conviction. "It just seems like we're celebrating Kimberly's role more than my birthday or my promotion," I said, hating how petty I sounded but unable to stop myself. My father's expression darkened. He set down his glass with more force than necessary. "Karen, why do you always have to make everything about you? We're trying to have a nice family dinner, and you're turning it into some kind of competition with your sister." "I'm not making it a competition," I protested. "This dinner was supposed to be for my birthday, but as usual, Kimberly shows up with an entourage and an announcement, and suddenly nothing else matters." "That's not fair," Kimberly interjected, looking genuinely upset. "I didn't plan this to overshadow your birthday. The timing just worked out this way with Martina being in town." The alcohol had lowered my inhibitions enough for me to continue. "It's never been fair. My entire life, I've worked twice as hard for half the recognition. I'm nearly 30, financially independent, advancing in my career, and I still can't get a fraction of the attention and support you've always given Kimberly." My father's face flushed with anger. He'd had several glasses of wine himself, which always made him more direct. "Maybe that's because Kimberly is pursuing something special, something extraordinary, something worth our attention and support." "And I'm not?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That's when he said it, the words I'll never forget. "Let's be honest, Karen. Kimberly is the only one worth celebrating in this family. You're just doing what anyone with a decent education could do." The table fell silent. Martina looked mortified to be witnessing this family implosion. Trevor stared at his plate. My mother placed a hand on my father's arm, too late to stop the damage. Kimberly looked at our father in shock. "Dad, that's a horrible thing to say." But the words had already hit their mark. I sat there, stunned, as years of suspected favoritism were finally confirmed in the cruelest way possible. Without saying another word, I placed my napkin on the table, grabbed my purse, and walked out of the restaurant, ignoring my mother's calls to come back. As I drove home through tears, I had no idea that this painful moment was just the beginning of a journey that would uncover secrets far more devastating than mere favoritism. The drive home from Canlis was a blur. Seattle's twinkling skyline, usually a sight I loved, seemed to mock me as I wiped tears away. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my purse. I ignored it. Whatever damage control my family was attempting would have to wait. When I reached my apartment in Queen Anne, I locked the door behind me and finally let myself break down completely. On my kitchen counter sat wrapped gifts I'd bought for my parents and Kimberly. Tokens of appreciation I'd planned to give them at what I'd foolishly thought would be a warm family celebration. The sight of those packages only intensified my pain. I silenced my phone after seeing multiple missed calls from my mother, 2 from Kimberly, and none from my father. There was also a text from my mother that read, "Your father didn't mean what he said. He had too much to drink. Please call us." The message contained no apology, just an excuse. Typical. Around midnight, I finally called my friend Emma, who answered despite the late hour. She'd been my roommate in college, and was the closest thing to family I felt I had at that moment. "He really said that? At your birthday dinner?" Emma's outrage on my behalf was exactly what I needed. Word for word, I confirmed, curled up on my couch with a glass of wine. And the worst part is, I'm not even surprised. Just hurt that he finally said out loud what I've always suspected they felt. "That's beyond favoritism, Karen. That's emotional abuse," Emma said firmly. "What did Kimberly say?" She actually seemed shocked. She texted me after I left, saying she was appalled and asking if I was okay. I sighed, staring out my window at the Space Needle in the distance. It's not her fault. She didn't ask to be the favorite. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Something I'd done perhaps twice in my entire career. I couldn't face people, couldn't pretend everything was normal when my entire sense of family had been shattered. I spent the day alternating between numbness, rage, and grief. By the third day of my self-imposed isolation, my phone contained 37 texts and 17 missed calls from my mother, 5 concerned texts from Kimberly, and still nothing from my father. I finally texted my boss, explaining I needed to take emergency personal leave. She was understanding, telling me to take the time I needed. On day 4, I ventured out only to buy groceries and schedule an emergency appointment with Dr. Larson, the therapist I'd been seeing occasionally since my breakup with Brett. In her office, I recounted the birthday dinner disaster. "I'm not surprised you're devastated," Dr. Larson said. "You've just had your worst fears confirmed in the most public and humiliating way possible." "I keep trying to rationalize it," I admitted. "Maybe my father really was just drunk. Maybe I've been too sensitive all these years." Dr. Larson's expression was serious. "Karen, what you're describing isn't normal family dynamics. Based on everything you've shared with me over our sessions, there appears to be a pattern of differential treatment that's deeply problematic. Your feelings are valid. So what do I do now?" I asked, feeling simultaneously validated and lost. "You have options," she said. "You could limit contact with your parents while you process this. You could confront them about the pattern of behavior, or you could try to maintain the relationship but with stronger boundaries." I left her office with a lot to think about. That night, I finally read through all of my mother's texts, which evolved from defensive, "Your father misspoke," to guilt-inducing, "This is breaking your father's heart," to angry, "You're being extremely immature by not responding." Not once did either of my parents simply say, "We're sorry. We love you." Kimberly's messages were different. "What Dad said was inexcusable," she wrote. "I had no idea they made you feel this way. Can we talk?" After a week of isolation, I finally responded to Kimberly, agreeing to call her the following day. Our conversation was awkward at first, but she seemed genuinely distressed about what had happened. "They've been calling me constantly, trying to get me to convince you to talk to them," she admitted. "Dad keeps saying his comment was taken out of context, but we all heard what he said." "It's not about that one comment," I explained. "It's about a lifetime of feeling like I'm not good enough, not special enough to deserve their attention or support." There was a long pause before Kimberly responded. "I never realized how different our experiences were," she said quietly. "I always envied how independent you are, how you don't seem to need their approval the way I do." That conversation with Kimberly was the first crack in my understanding of our family dynamic. It made me wonder what else I might have misinterpreted or missed entirely. As I approached the 2-week mark of no contact with my parents, I began to feel a shift from raw hurt to determined curiosity. If my father could say something so blatantly preferential, what other truths might be lurking beneath the surface of our family? What else might explain the disparity in how we were treated? I decided that before I would consider any kind of reconciliation, I needed answers. Not excuses or placating words, but real explanations for a lifetime of feeling like an outsider in my own family. And I was going to approach this like I would a challenging coding problem. Methodically, with attention to detail, gathering all available data before drawing conclusions. What I didn't realize was that my search for answers would uncover secrets far more shocking than mere favoritism. Secrets that would fundamentally change how I understood not just my family, but my very identity. I've learned that family relationships can be incredibly complex, sometimes in ways we never expected. Speaking of unexpected complexity, I'd love to hear about your experiences with family revelations in the comments. Have you ever discovered something that changed your understanding of your family dynamic? Sometimes sharing these stories helps us make sense of our own experiences. I approached my investigation with the same methodical precision I applied to debugging complex code. First, I needed more information from sources outside my immediate family. My maternal grandmother, Ruth, had always shown me special attention, often sending me books and calling to check on my studies when I was in college. If anyone would give me honest answers, it would be her. I called her on a Wednesday afternoon, knowing she would be home after her weekly bridge game. Karen, sweetheart, what a lovely surprise, she answered warmly. I was just thinking about you. Happy belated birthday. We chatted about general topics for a while before I carefully steered the conversation toward my concerns. Grandma, can I ask you something about Mom and Dad? Something's been bothering me. Of course, dear. What is it? Did you ever notice them treating Kimberly differently than me? Giving her more support or attention? There was a long pause on the line. Oh, Karen, she finally sighed. I've worried about this for years. Your mother and I have had quite a few arguments about it, especially regarding the financial disparities. Financial disparities? I prompted, my interest piqued. Well, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I think you deserve to know. Your grandfather and I set up college funds for both you girls when you were born, equal amounts. But when you went to MIT, your parents told us they were handling your education themselves, so we shouldn't worry about your fund. My heart began to pound. What happened to my college fund? Another pause. I found out later they used it for Kimberly's performing arts school. When I confronted your mother, she said you had scholarships and were independent, while Kimberly needed more support. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I'd worked multiple jobs and taken out substantial student loans, while my college fund had been given to Kimberly. The financial struggle had delayed my career progress and affected my quality of life for years after graduation. There's something else, Grandma continued hesitantly. Something that might explain some of their behavior. But I don't think it's my place to tell you. You should ask your parents directly. Despite my pressing, she refused to elaborate further, only saying, family histories are complicated, Karen. Sometimes people make decisions they think are for the best, even when they're misguided. That cryptic comment set my mind racing. What family history could possibly justify such blatant favoritism? My next step was to access family documents. I knew my parents kept important papers in a home office filing cabinet and a safe in their bedroom closet. They were leaving for a weekend trip to Portland for one of my father's business meetings, and they had always kept a spare key hidden under a false rock in their garden. It was ethically questionable to enter their home without permission, but I justified it as necessary to uncover the truth they had denied me for years. That Saturday, I let myself into their house in the Madison Park neighborhood. Everything was immaculate, as always, family photos prominently displayed. I noticed with a fresh perspective how many more photos featured Kimberly than me. In the home office, I started with the filing cabinet, methodically going through folders of financial documents, property records, and insurance policies. Nothing seemed unusual until I found a folder labeled Karen, important at the back of the drawer. Inside were documents I'd expected: my birth certificate, social security card, childhood immunization records. But there was also a sealed envelope labeled Karen, do not open, in my mother's handwriting. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. Inside were adoption papers, legal documents stating that Robert and Diane Mitchell had adopted me, Karen Jessica Mitchell, when I was 3 weeks old. The birth mother was listed as Jessica Pierce. I felt the room spinning around me. Adopted? How was this possible? Why had they never told me? In a daze, I moved to their bedroom and located the safe in the closet. I knew the combination was my mother's birth year. Inside, among jewelry and emergency cash, I found a small box containing more documents. One was a death certificate for Jessica Pierce, dated 15 years ago. Heart failure at age 38. There was also a faded photograph of a young woman with auburn hair and eyes that looked startlingly like my own. On the back was written Jessica, 1,993 inches handwriting I didn't recognize. My mind was reeling. If I was adopted, that explained so much about the differential treatment. But why keep it a secret for 29 years? And who was Jessica Pierce to my parents? I carefully returned everything to its proper place, except for copies I made of the adoption papers and the death certificate. I needed more information, and I knew exactly how to get it. Back at my apartment, I ordered a DNA testing kit online, paying extra for expedited processing. While waiting for the results, I conducted online searches for Jessica Pierce, finding little except an obituary that mentioned she had been an art teacher in Portland and was survived by her parents and a brother. 2 weeks later, the DNA test results arrived. They confirmed what the documents had revealed. I had no biological connection to the Mitchell family. But the test also provided something unexpected: a likely parent-child match with a man named Brian Walker, who had also used the same DNA service. There was an option to connect with genetic matches through the service's messaging system. With my heart pounding, I wrote a simple message. "My name is Karen Mitchell. I recently discovered I was adopted, and our DNA shows a parent-child match. I was born in Seattle in 1995 to a woman named Jessica Pierce. I'm trying to understand my history and would appreciate any information you might have." 3 days later, I received a response that would change everything. "Karen, I can't believe this. I'm Brian Walker. Jessica and I dated in college at UW. I had no idea she was pregnant when we broke up. I never knew you existed. This is overwhelming, but I'd very much like to talk. Here's my number if you're comfortable calling." The final piece clicked into place when I called Brian later that day. His voice was warm and shocked by turns as he explained his history with Jessica. "Jessica and I dated for about a year at UW. She was an art major. I was studying engineering. We broke up when she got an opportunity to study in Europe. I had no idea she was pregnant." "Did you know Robert Mitchell?" I asked, my suspicion growing. "Rob?" "Yes. We were in the same engineering program. He started dating Diane shortly after Jessica left for Europe." He paused. "Wait, are you saying Robert Mitchell adopted you? Rob is your father?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Robert and Diane Mitchell adopted me as an infant." There was a long silence before Brian spoke again, his voice tight with emotion. "Karen, there's something you need to know. Rob and Jessica had dated before she and I got together. It was serious between them. They broke up because he met Diane, who was in a beauty pageant he attended. The timing—" He trailed off, seemingly doing mental calculations. "What about the timing?" I pressed. "If Jessica was pregnant when she left for Europe, and we had just broken up, and you were born in early 1995, there's a possibility that Rob, not me, might be your biological father. The DNA test suggests otherwise. But Jessica and Rob had only been broken up for a couple of months before she and I got together." The implication was staggering. Had my father adopted me knowing I might be his biological child? Was I the result of an affair? Or had this been some bizarre act of charity toward his ex-girlfriend? I needed answers. And there was only one way to get them. It was time to confront my parents with everything I'd discovered. Life can take unexpected turns that change everything we thought we knew. Like this investigation that started with a hurtful comment and led to discovering my entire identity was built on secrets. If you've been following this journey with me, I'd love to know if you've ever had to completely reconsider your understanding of your family or yourself. Sometimes the truth can be both painful and freeing at the same time. Continue watching to see how I confronted my parents with the evidence I'd found. After 2 weeks of emotional turmoil and shocking discoveries, I decided it was time to confront my parents. I called my mother on a Tuesday morning, keeping my voice neutral. "Hi, Mom. I think we should talk. Would you and Dad be available for dinner at your house tomorrow night?" Her relief was palpable through the phone. "Of course, sweetheart. We've been so worried about you. I'll make your favorite lasagna." "That won't be necessary," I replied coolly. "I'll bring takeout. This isn't a celebration." I arrived at their Madison Park home at exactly 6:30 p.m. the following day, carrying bags of Thai food I knew they both enjoyed. My father opened the door, his expression a mixture of wariness and relief. "Karen, good to see you," he said, attempting to hug me. I stepped past him into the house, avoiding the contact. My mother was hovering in the entryway, her smile too bright. "We've missed you so much, honey. Let's eat first," I suggested, unpacking the food in their dining room. "Then we can talk." Dinner was a strained affair. My parents made nervous attempts at conversation while I responded with minimal answers. My father didn't mention his only one worth celebrating comment, nor did he offer an apology. He seemed to be operating under the assumption that enough time had passed for the incident to be forgotten. After we finished eating and cleared the plates, I took a deep breath and placed a folder on the table. "I have some questions," I began, "and I need honest answers. For once in my life, I need the complete truth from both of you." My parents exchanged glances. My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "First, I want to talk about the pattern of favoritism toward Kimberly that has defined my entire life." I proceeded to methodically outline examples, from childhood celebrations to financial support disparities. I detailed how my college fund had been diverted to Kimberly's performing arts education without my knowledge. My father's face reddened with each example. "That's not favoritism," he insisted. "We were just responding to different needs. Kimberly needed more support." "And why did she need more support?" I asked. "Because her career choice was risky? Or because she's your biological daughter and I'm not?" The silence that fell over the room was deafening. My mother's face drained of color. My father's mouth opened and closed without producing words. I pulled out the copies of the adoption papers and placed them on the table. "When were you planning to tell me? My 30th birthday? My 40th? Never?" My mother began to cry. "We were going to tell you when you were younger, but the right time never seemed to come. And then as more time passed, it got harder to find the words." "Who is Jessica Pierce to you?" I asked my father directly, watching his reaction carefully. He looked like he might be sick. "How do you know that name?" "Answer the question," I insisted. He ran a hand through his graying hair. "Jessica was my girlfriend in college, before I met your mother." "And did you know she was pregnant when you broke up with her?" My mother's head snapped up to look at my father, suggesting this was territory even she hadn't explored. My father's voice was barely audible. "Yes, I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach despite having suspected this." "So I might be your biological daughter? Is that why you adopted me? Some kind of guilty conscience?" "No," he said quickly. "Jessica told me she was pregnant, but that it wasn't mine. She said she had started seeing someone else right after we broke up, and the timing made it clear I wasn't the father." "Brian Walker," I supplied. The shock on my father's face was genuine. "You know about Brian?" "I know a lot more than you think," I said. "I've taken a DNA test. Brian Walker is my biological father, not you. I've been in contact with him." My mother gasped. "You've spoken to him?" "Yes. And unlike you, he's been completely honest with me. He never knew Jessica was pregnant. He never knew I existed until I contacted him." I turned back to my father. "So if you knew I wasn't your biological child, why adopt me?" My father looked at the floor. "Jessica reached out when you were born. She wasn't in a position to raise a child on her own. She couldn't locate Brian, who had moved after graduation. She asked if we would consider adopting you." "Out of the kindness of your hearts?" I asked skeptically. "Partly," he admitted. "And partly because I felt responsible for her situation." "Robert," my mother warned. "She deserves the truth, Diane," my father snapped before turning back to me. "Jessica and I were serious. We had talked about marriage, but then I met your mother at a pageant function, and I broke things off with Jessica rather abruptly. She was devastated. I think she got together with Brian on the rebound. When she found herself pregnant and alone, she reached out to me because she didn't know where else to turn." "So I was what? A charity case? A way to assuage your guilt?" "No," my father protested. "We adopted you because we wanted a child. Your mother and I had been trying for almost 2 years without success. When Jessica approached us, it seemed like fate. We loved you from the moment we saw you," my mother added tearfully. "You were such a beautiful baby." "Then why the favoritism toward Kimberly?" I pressed. "If you truly saw me as your daughter, why the differential treatment?" My mother looked at my father, then back at me. Her voice was small when she spoke. I think part of me was always jealous." "Jealous? Of who?" "Of Jessica," she admitted. "Robert and I were only married for a year when we adopted you. I was still insecure about his past with Jessica. And you looked so much like her, with your auburn hair and green eyes. Sometimes when Robert would dote on you as a baby, I wondered if he was seeing her in you." "That's ridiculous, Diane," my father interjected. "Is it?" she challenged. "You kept her picture all these years. Hidden, but kept. I watched them argue as if I wasn't there, stunned by the revelation. My mother had been jealous of a ghost, and I had paid the price. When I got pregnant with Kimberly, my mother continued, she was mine in a way you never could be. I'm not proud of these feelings, Karen. I've never admitted them out loud before, not even to myself. But I think they affected how I treated you both. And you? I asked my father. What's your excuse? He looked genuinely confused. I never meant to favor Kimberly. I tried to support both of you in the ways you seem to need. By saying she's the only one worth celebrating? I reminded him sharply. He had the grace to look ashamed. That was inexcusable. I was drunk and annoyed, but that's no excuse. I apologize for saying something so hurtful and untrue. I sat back, processing everything. Does Kimberly know I'm adopted? My parents exchanged glances again. No, my mother admitted. We never told her, so she has no idea that we're not biologically related? We're still a family, Karen, my father insisted. Blood doesn't determine that, except apparently it does, I countered. Because the daughter who shares your blood got the support, attention, and celebration. The adopted daughter got student loans and conditional love. That's not fair, my mother protested. None of this is fair, I agreed. Not what you did to me by keeping this secret my entire life. Not what you did to Kimberly by lying to her too. Not what you did to Brian by keeping him from knowing he had a daughter. I stood up, gathering my documents. I'm going to tell Kimberly the truth. She deserves to know, just like I deserve to know. You have until this weekend to tell her yourselves. If you don't, I will. Please, don't do this, my mother begged. It will destroy her. Destroy her? I repeated incredulously. What about me? Do you have any idea what this has done to me? Finding out my entire identity was a lie? That the feeling of being an outsider in my family that haunted me my whole life was based on real jealousy and resentment? We never meant to hurt you, my father said weakly. But you did, I replied. And now you have a choice. Start being honest or lose both your daughters. Because I won't keep living in a family built on lies. I walked out, leaving them with their secret for the last time. The ball was in their court, but I was no longer playing by their rules. I had found my truth, and with it, a new understanding of who I was and where I came from. Now I just needed to figure out what to do with that knowledge, starting with a conversation with my sister, who wasn't actually my sister at all. The days following my confrontation with my parents were filled with a strange combination of grief and liberation. I grieved for the family I thought I had, for the years of unnecessary pain, and for the relationships that might never recover. But I also felt liberated by the truth, finally understanding the dynamics that had shaped my life. My parents, true to form, called and texted incessantly, alternating between pleading with me not to tell Kimberly and promising they would do it themselves when the time was right. I ignored most of these communications, responding only to clarify that my deadline stood. Meanwhile, I focused on establishing a connection with my biological father. After our initial phone conversation, Brian and I exchanged several emails. He lived in Portland, only a 3-hour drive from Seattle, and suggested meeting in person when I felt ready. His warmth and openness were refreshing after decades of conditional acceptance from the Mitchells. I learned that Brian was now an environmental engineering consultant, specializing in sustainable water systems. He had married in his mid-30s to a pediatrician named Mary Ann, and they had 2 children, David 14 and Rachel 12. My half-siblings, I realized with a jolt. I had family I never knew existed. Brian had researched Jessica after learning about me, discovering she had never married and had died from a congenital heart condition 15 years earlier. He expressed deep regret that he hadn't known about her pregnancy. If I had known about you, I would have been there, he wrote in one particularly emotional email. I would have wanted to be your father. Please don't think for a moment that you weren't wanted. His words healed something in me I hadn't realized was broken. My entire life, I'd subconsciously suspected I wasn't fully wanted or loved. Having concrete confirmation that I would have been cherished by my biological father if circumstances had been different was surprisingly powerful. After a week of correspondence, I decided I was ready to meet Brian in person. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in Portland on Saturday afternoon. I took Friday off work and drove down, staying in a hotel to ensure I was rested and prepared for what would undoubtedly be an emotional encounter. The cafe was a cozy spot near Powell's Books, with warm lighting and enough privacy for an intimate conversation. I arrived early, choosing a corner table and ordering a latte to calm my nerves. When the door opened at exactly 2 p.m., I immediately recognized Brian from the photos he'd shared. He was tall with salt and pepper hair, a trim beard, and green eyes that matched my own. He spotted me instantly, his face lighting up with recognition and emotion. When he reached the table, we both hesitated, unsure of the appropriate greeting for this unprecedented situation. "Karen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't believe you're really here." I stood, and without overthinking it, stepped forward to hug him. The embrace was awkward at first, then melted into something that felt surprisingly natural. When we separated, I noticed tears in his eyes, which triggered my own. "I'm sorry," he said, pulling out a handkerchief and offering it to me before wiping his own eyes. "I've been trying to prepare myself for this moment, but there's really no way to prepare, is there?" "Not really," I agreed with a small laugh, dabbing at my tears. We ordered coffee and talked for hours. The conversation flowed easily, jumping from my childhood and education to his career and family. He showed me photos of his wife and children on his phone, pointing out features we shared. David had my high forehead and analytical expression, while Rachel had the same dimple in her left cheek. "They know about you," Brian said. "I told them as soon as I confirmed our connection. They're excited to meet their big sister, whenever you're ready." The phrase "big sister" hit me unexpectedly. I'd gone from being the less favored older sister in one family to being welcomed as a long-lost sibling in another. But the most profound moment came when Brian pulled out a small photo album from his messenger bag. "I thought you might want to see these," he said, sliding it across the table. Inside were photos of Jessica Pierce from their college days. There she was, laughing on a campus lawn, concentrating intently on a painting, smiling next to a younger Brian at what appeared to be a party. My biological mother, captured in moments of joy and creativity. "She was an incredible artist," Brian said softly. "Her specialty was watercolor landscapes, but she could draw or paint almost anything. She had this ability to see beauty in ordinary places and make others see it too." I traced a finger over her face in one of the photos. I always wondered where my artistic tendencies came from. I'm not a traditional artist, but I approach coding as a creative process. The elegance of a well-designed algorithm feels like art to me. Brian nodded enthusiastically. "That makes perfect sense." Jessica approached art methodically too. She'd study a subject from multiple angles, make detailed sketches before starting a painting. "She'd have understood your coding process perfectly." We both grew quiet, contemplating the connection between my unknown mother's artistic method and my own approach to software engineering. It was a revelation to discover that aspects of myself I'd always valued had genetic roots in this woman I would never know. Before we parted that evening, Brian asked if I'd like to meet his family the following day. "No pressure," he assured me. "But they're all free tomorrow, and we're having a barbecue in the backyard. Very casual. You'd be welcome to join us." I surprised myself by agreeing immediately. The prospect of meeting more biological relatives felt right, a continuation of this journey of self-discovery. The Walker family home was a craftsman-style house in a leafy Portland neighborhood. Marianne greeted me with a warm hug that conveyed both welcome and acknowledgement of the situation's complexity. David was shy but curious, while Rachel bombarded me with questions about my job, my hobbies, and whether I liked Taylor Swift. I did, which apparently earned significant points. The afternoon was surreal but wonderful. I found myself laughing genuinely, answering questions about my life without the self-censorship I'd developed with the Mitchells. When David mentioned an interest in programming, Brian suggested I might help him with some basics, a natural connection between us that felt effortless. As we sat around the patio table eating grilled salmon and summer vegetables, Marianne asked gently about my adoptive family. I gave a simplified version of the story, not wanting to burden these new relationships with the full weight of that dysfunction. They gave you a home, Brian acknowledged. For that, I'm grateful, even if they made mistakes. Serious mistakes, Marianne murmured, giving my hand a squeeze. After dinner, Brian suggested a walk. Just the two of us strolled through the neighborhood as the summer evening cooled. There's one more thing, he said hesitantly. Jessica is buried here in Portland. Her parents have both passed away, but I found her grave. If you ever wanted to visit, I could take you. The offer caught me off guard. I hadn't considered this possibility. I think I'd like that, I said finally. Not today, but soon. Of course, he nodded. Whenever you're ready. As I drove back to Seattle the next day, I felt a strange sense of peace. My life had been upended in many ways, but for the first time, I felt like I was seeing the complete picture of who I was and where I came from. The road ahead with both my families would be complicated, but I was no longer navigating it blindly. I still had one major hurdle to face, telling Kimberly the truth. But now I approached that conversation with a stronger sense of my own identity and worth. Whatever happened next, I knew who I was, and that knowledge gave me a foundation I'd never had before. By the time I returned to Seattle Sunday evening, I had numerous missed calls and texts from both my parents and Kimberly. My parents' messages were increasingly desperate, begging me not to destroy our family by revealing the adoption. Kimberly's messages, however, were different. Mom and Dad are acting super weird, she'd written. They keep asking if I've talked to you and looking like they might be sick. What's going on? Are you okay? I texted Kimberly back, suggesting we meet at her apartment the following evening. If my parents hadn't told her the truth by then, I would. Monday at work was a blur. I could barely focus on code reviews and team meetings when such a momentous conversation loomed ahead. By 6 p.m., I was standing outside Kimberly's door in Capitol Hill, steeling myself for what was to come. She opened the door wearing yoga pants and an oversized UW sweatshirt, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun. "Finally!" she exclaimed, pulling me inside. "What is going on?" Mom called me 4 times today, just to ask if we were meeting and to tell me she loves me. It's freaking me out. I sat down on her couch, noting the familiar chaos of her living space. Scripts scattered across the coffee table, half-empty coffee cups, a clothes rack with costumes for whatever production she was currently involved in. "Kimberly, we need to talk about something important. Have Mom and Dad spoken to you about anything unusual in the last few days?" She frowned, sitting cross-legged on the floor across from me. "No, just the weird phone calls. Why? What's happening?" I took a deep breath. After my birthday dinner disaster, I started looking into some things about our family. I made some discoveries that change everything, at least for me. "Karen, you're scaring me," she said, her eyes wide. I reached into my bag and pulled out copies of the adoption papers and the DNA test results. There's no easy way to say this. I'm adopted. Robert and Diane aren't my biological parents. Kimberly stared at me, then at the papers, then back at me. "What? No. That's not possible. They would have told us." "They didn't tell either of us," I said gently. "I confirmed it with a DNA test. I've also located and met my biological father." She grabbed the papers, scanning them with increasing disbelief. "This can't be real. It has to be some kind of mistake." "It's not a mistake," I assured her. "I confronted Mom and Dad last week. They admitted everything. My biological mother was Dad's ex-girlfriend from college. She got pregnant after they broke up, by another man. When she couldn't raise me herself, she asked them to adopt me." Kimberly's face had gone pale. "So we're not actually sisters?" "Biologically, no. But we grew up together. That counts for something." She stood up suddenly, pacing the small living room. "This explains so much. The way they always treated us differently. I always thought they favored me because I was pursuing the arts like Mom wanted, or because I was the baby of the family. But it was because I was their real daughter, and you weren't. That's what I've been struggling with," I admitted. "I'm so sorry, Karen," she said, tears forming. "I had no idea. All those times I accepted their help, their money, their attention. I never questioned why they gave me so much and you so little. It's not your fault, I said firmly. You didn't know. But I should have seen it, she insisted. I should have noticed how unfair it was. I was just so self-absorbed, so focused on my career, on what I wanted. We were both working with limited information, I said. The question is, where do we go from here? Kimberly sat back down, wiping away tears. I'm furious with them. To lie to both of us our entire lives. It's unforgivable. They begged me not to tell you, I revealed. They were more concerned with keeping their secret than with how it affected me. Typical, she said bitterly. Always trying to control the narrative. We talked for hours, piecing together memories with this new understanding. Kimberly recalled times when our mother had made odd comments about my appearance or personality being different from the rest of the family. I shared details about my biological parents and my meeting with Brian and his family. I want to meet them too, Kimberly said unexpectedly. If that's okay with you, they're part of your life now, and I want to be part of your life too, if you'll still have me as a sister. Her words touched me deeply. Of course, I still want you as my sister. That hasn't changed. The next morning, Kimberly called our parents and unleashed her fury. I could hear her shouting through the phone from across her apartment. She ended the call by telling them she needed space and wouldn't be speaking to them for a while. They want to have a family meeting, she reported, setting down her phone, to explain everything properly. I told them they've had 29 years to explain and blew it. We agreed to attend one family therapy session 2 weeks later, giving everyone time to process the initial shock. I suggested Dr. Larson, my therapist, as a neutral mediator. Those 2 weeks were transformative for Kimberly and me. Without our parents' influence, we began forming a relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition. Kimberly confessed she had always envied my independence and drive, while I admitted I had envied her apparent ease with our parents and her artistic confidence. I've never told anyone this, she said during a late-night conversation at my apartment, but I've been thinking about quitting acting for a while now. I'm not sure I even like it anymore, or if I ever really did. What would you do instead? I asked. I've been volunteering at a youth theater program, working with kids. I love teaching more than performing. She looked embarrassed. But Mom and Dad have invested so much in my acting career. I felt trapped. You don't owe them your life choices, I pointed out. Especially now. The day of the family therapy session arrived with a mixture of dread and determination. Dr. Larson had agreed to host the meeting at her office, providing a neutral setting for what would undoubtedly be an emotional conversation. My parents arrived looking haggard. My mother had lost weight, and my father's face seemed to have aged years in mere weeks. Kimberly and I sat on one side of the room, a united front for perhaps the first time in our lives. Dr. Larson established ground rules for the session, emphasizing respect and taking turns speaking. Then she invited my parents to explain their perspective. My father cleared his throat. We made a terrible mistake by not telling Karen about her adoption. We convinced ourselves it was for her own good, that knowing would only hurt her. As time passed, it became harder and harder to find the right moment. We truly love you, Karen, my mother added tearfully. From the moment we held you, you were our daughter. The adoption doesn't change that. But it did change how you treated me, I countered. You consistently favored Kimberly. You diverted my college fund to her performing arts school. You made me feel less important, less worthy of celebration. And you lied to me too, Kimberly interjected. You let me believe we were full sisters. You put me in an impossible position where I benefited from your favoritism without knowing why it existed. My parents looked genuinely surprised by Kimberly's anger. They had clearly expected her to take their side. We never meant to show favoritism, my father insisted. Intent doesn't erase impact, Dr. Larson noted gently. Karen and Kimberly experienced a pattern of differential treatment, regardless of your intentions. The session continued with painful honesty on all sides. My mother finally admitted that her jealousy of Jessica had affected her ability to bond with me as an infant, creating a pattern that persisted throughout my childhood. My father acknowledged that guilt over his treatment of Jessica had complicated his relationship with me. By the end of the session, it was clear that healing would take time, if it was possible at all. Dr. Larson suggested ongoing family therapy, as well as individual sessions for everyone involved. In the parking lot afterward, my parents tried to hug us goodbye. I allowed a brief, stiff embrace. Kimberly stepped back, shaking her head. "I need more time," she told them. "And I'm moving in with Karen for a while. I need space to figure out who I am outside of your expectations." My parents looked devastated, but they didn't argue. As they drove away, Kimberly turned to me. "Did I just invite myself to live with you?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "Apparently so. Good thing I have a spare bedroom." Kimberly's temporary move-in became a healing experience for both of us. Without our parents' influence, we discovered a genuine friendship. She helped me process my complicated feelings about my adoption and biological parents, while I supported her as she explored career options beyond acting. The extended family eventually learned about my adoption through the inevitable grapevine. Reactions were mixed. My maternal grandparents, who had known all along, reached out with love and support. My father's brother stopped speaking to him, furious about the deception. Cousins, aunts, and uncles took various sides, some defending my parents' choices, others expressing shock and dismay. Through it all, Kimberly remained my strongest ally. When I invited her to meet Brian and his family, she came without hesitation, charming them with her natural warmth and genuine interest in getting to know them. She even helped arrange a meaningful visit to Jessica's grave, where I was finally able to connect with the woman who had given birth to me. "She would be so proud of you," Kimberly said, as we stood together before the simple headstone. "Not just for what you've accomplished, but for having the courage to seek the truth." As months passed, our relationships with our parents slowly began to heal, but on entirely new terms. I no longer sought their approval or acceptance. Instead, I offered forgiveness in exchange for honesty and respect. Kimberly did the same, making it clear that her choices about her career and future were hers alone to make. The journey wasn't easy. There were setbacks, arguments, and moments of deep pain for everyone involved. But through it all, I held on to the truth that had emerged from this family crisis. I knew who I was now, both as Karen Mitchell, adopted daughter of Robert and Diane, and as the biological child of Jessica Pierce and Brian Walker. My identity was no longer defined by secrets or favoritism, but by the strength I'd found in uncovering the truth. My 30th birthday arrived exactly 1 year after the disastrous dinner that had changed everything. This time, there was no reservation at an exclusive restaurant, no awkward family tension, no unspoken resentments simmering beneath polite conversation. Instead, I hosted a gathering at my apartment, now temporarily shared with Kimberly, who had extended her short stay to nearly 8 months as she completed her teaching certification. Brian had driven up from Portland with his wife Marianne and my half-siblings David and Rachel. My friend Emma came with her new boyfriend. A few close colleagues from work rounded out the guest list. Conspicuously absent were Robert and Diane Mitchell, who had been invited but had declined, citing a previously scheduled commitment. I suspected they simply weren't ready to meet Brian face to face, a confrontation with the past they still struggled to process. The gathering was everything. Last year's dinner wasn't. Genuine, joyful, and centered on authentic connections rather than appearances. We ate pizza and homemade cake instead of gourmet cuisine. People sprawled comfortably on couches and floor pillows, rather than sitting stiffly at a formal table. Laughter flowed easily, without the undercurrent of judgment I'd grown accustomed to in family settings. As I looked around the room, I marveled at how much had changed in a single year. Professionally, I was thriving. My promotion to technical director had been followed by leading a successful security protocol implementation that had earned recognition throughout the company. I was now mentoring junior developers, something I found unexpectedly rewarding. Kimberly had undergone her own transformation. After our confrontation with our parents, she had finally felt free to pursue her true passion. She had quit acting entirely and was now teaching drama at a local high school, working with teenagers to build confidence through performance. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She had spent years performing to please our parents, only to find fulfillment in helping others express themselves authentically. Our relationship with Robert and Diane had evolved into something neither of us could have predicted. After months of family therapy, both individual and group sessions, we had established a cautious peace. There was still damage that might never be fully repaired, but we had reached a point of understanding that allowed for limited contact on new terms. My mother had done the most significant work in therapy, finally confronting her jealousy and resentment of Jessica. Learning that her treatment of me had been influenced by these unresolved feelings had been devastating for her. To her credit, she had committed to the painful process of examining these emotions and taking responsibility for their impact. My father had struggled more with accountability. His tendency to minimize or rationalize past behavior had initially hampered progress in therapy. It wasn't until Kimberly delivered an ultimatum, refusing to see him until he acknowledged the damage his favoritism had caused, that he began to truly engage with the process of making amends. Brian had become a steady, supportive presence in my life. We spoke weekly, and I visited Portland monthly. He never tried to replace Robert as my father, but he offered something different: unconditional acceptance without the weight of complicated history. David and Rachel had embraced me as their older sister with an enthusiasm that still touched me deeply. Rachel had even started calling me for advice about boys and school drama, thrilled to have a cool older sister to consult. One of the most meaningful experiences of the past year had been visiting Jessica's grave with Brian and Kimberly. We had stood together before the simple headstone in a quiet Portland cemetery, each lost in our own thoughts about the woman who connected us all. Brian had shared stories about Jessica's kindness, her artistic talent, her quick wit. I had placed a small watercolor painting I'd commissioned of Mount Rainier against the stone, a nod to her artistic legacy. "I think she would have loved knowing you two found each other," Kimberly had said quietly, "and that you found yourself in the process." Therapy had been essential to my healing journey. Dr. Larson had helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my adoption and the years of differential treatment. She had guided me through anger, grief, and finally to acceptance not of what had happened, but of the fact that I couldn't change the past. "The question isn't whether your parents should have treated you differently," she had said during one particularly breakthrough session. "The question is how you want to define family going forward." That question had shaped my approach to relationships over the past year. I had learned to value chosen family alongside biological connections. Emma, who had supported me through the initial crisis, remained a sister in all the ways that mattered. My work colleagues had become friends rather than mere professional acquaintances, as I allowed myself to be more vulnerable and authentic. My romantic life had also seen changes. 6 months after the adoption revelation, I had met Mark, an architect who approached life with the same analytical creativity I valued in myself. Unlike Brett, who had found my career focus intimidating, Mark appreciated my ambition and intelligence. Our relationship was still new, but built on mutual respect and understanding rather than expectations about traditional gender roles. As I prepared to blow out the candles on my birthday cake, surrounded by this eclectic chosen family, I felt a sense of gratitude that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. The painful truth had broken apart the false family structure I'd grown up in, but from those fragments, I had built something stronger and more authentic. "Make a wish," Rachel called out excitedly as Brian lit the candles. I closed my eyes, thinking not of what I wanted, but of what I already had: truth, authentic connections, and the freedom to define family on my own terms. When I opened my eyes and blew out the candles, I caught Kimberly's gaze across the table. She smiled, a genuine smile without the competitive edge that had once characterized our interactions. Later, as guests began to leave, Brian pulled me aside. "I have something for you," he said, handing me a small wrapped package. "It belonged to Jessica. I found it when I was going through some old boxes. I think she would want you to have it." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a paintbrush. She wore this through college, Brian explained. Art was her identity, just like coding is part of yours. I slipped it onto my wrist, feeling an unexpected connection to the mother I'd never known. Thank you, I said simply, knowing he understood the depth of emotion behind those two words. As the apartment quieted, only Kimberly remained, helping me clean up the birthday aftermath. What a difference a year makes, she remarked, collecting paper plates and cups. From the only one worth celebrating to this, I agreed, referencing our father's cruel words that had set everything in motion. You know what I realized recently? Kimberly said, pausing in her cleanup efforts. They were wrong about both of us. They thought I needed to be famous to be worthy of celebration, and they thought you needed to be biologically theirs to be worth loving. They were wrong on both counts. Her insight struck me deeply. You're right. We defined our worth on their terms for so long. And now? She prompted. Now we get to decide for ourselves what makes us worth celebrating, I answered. And who we want to celebrate with. As I fell asleep that night, the bracelet from Jessica still on my wrist, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. One cruel comment had exposed decades of lies, but it had also set me free to discover my true identity and build authentic relationships. Sometimes, I realized, a family has to break apart completely before it can be rebuilt into something real. If you followed my story all the way through, I'd love to know what you would have done in my situation. Would you have confronted your parents? Would you have reached out to your biological family? Family secrets can cause generations of pain, but sometimes exposing them leads to healing we never thought possible. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own family dynamics, please share your thoughts in the comments. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this journey, consider sharing this video with them. As always, I appreciate your support in helping these stories reach those who need them most. Thank you for being part of my extended chosen family, and I wish you clarity and authenticity in all your relationships.